and it's really interesting because I'd like to talk about the Cumnock Trist whole initiative in a little while. But it's interesting what you're saying about tapping into our communities again, because there's been such a heavy discussion and push towards music education, arts education, over many, many years now. And I think perhaps you and I are of the generation whereby we really benefited from the immense richness in school education, school music education that we had. I believe we both had really rich landscapes, both within the school and also in the community. And but of course that's sometimes quite patchy nowadays, and perhaps being a believer in kind of a yin and yang situation, that although we're experiencing very dark days at the moment, there has to be some positives out of this. And it might be that through the lack of international travel and performances, as we've known, that perhaps looking closer to home might inject that sort of real inspiration for our communities, our young people, what music means within the family, social situation, etc., etc. So it may not be such a bad thing.
Well, I know that many musicians involved in music education up here in Scotland have a kind of galvanizing approach now to making music work more in their communities, and we've perhaps been able to speak more directly to those in power about the need to focus on the very young in our communities, to get music education back as one of the basics again, because I think you're right, there has been a sense of drift, both north and south of the border, and the great experiences for people like us in the 1970s and 80s and so on of learning music at school and not forcing our parents to pay for music lessons too much. Those days have gone, or at least they're looking very precarious, and it would be a great scandal if it was just the well-off, because they were able to afford music lessons, that were able to benefit from music provision. And those of us involved in music in the community, music in education, have been re-galvanized in telling that story to those in power, speaking truth to power, as they say, and making them remember that this is so important. A life without music, an education without music, is an education and a life impoverished. And not everyone is going to be a professional musician, but to go through a school life without being involved and exposed to music in all its forms is a great dereliction of education, if that's allowed to happen. And I think we're looking at the possibility of that happening more and more for a lot of young people, and that would be a great mistake. It would be an assault on the educational opportunities of the young, and it's allowed us to renew those arguments to government and to the politicians and so on, that perhaps in the middle of this lockdown and a pandemic, we can start really focusing on the basics again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, has a pandemic revealed something about you as a person that perhaps has surprised you?
Oh,
There, I put you on the spot, James.
Yes. Well, I think I've always felt and always thought that the interior life was the important life. And I suppose being a composer, or any reflective person generally, one has to believe that, and one has to focus on that. But sometimes you can lose sight of what it actually means. And an enforced silence like this, an enforced restriction, where you don't see people, where you don't get to work with your peers. It forces you back in on yourself, whether we like it or not. But, you know, there has been a great cultural hinterland in our civilization and in our history of people, not just artists and musicians, but thinkers and spiritual people as well, one way or another, that have gone deep into the interior life of contemplation, of meditation, and in the Judeo-Christian experience, the world of prayer. And it's in that interior life that perhaps one finds the real essence of what it means to be human. There are hardships involved in that interior life if it means a lessening of social activity. Of course, that's the case. If we lose our connection with our peers, if we don't see our friends and family, that is a real loss to us. But there are perhaps some compensations in that we're allowed that scope and time to go deeper into the serious things in our thinking, and what it means to be human. And it's certainly given us a lot of time to reflect on those deeper truths. And for a composer or any artist, these are essential moments, these are essential reflections. And perhaps we will all emerge emboldened and strengthened through these restrictions in the end. At least that, I keep my fingers crossed that will be the case.
Absolutely.